The dollar empire, America's most powerful weapon, economic engine. Every war America ever fought cost blood, time, and money. But there is one weapon that never fired a single shot. No army, no missiles, no physical borders. And yet, it topples governments, isolates entire nations, decides who prospers and who collapses. This weapon has a name, the US dollar. And this affects you every single day, whether you realize it or not. The price of your groceries, the cost of your gas, the interest rate on your mortgage, the job market in your city, all of it connected to a financial system built around one currency, one country, one decision made 80 years ago in a mountain resort in New Hampshire. Right now, 88% of all international financial transactions on the planet flow through it. 60% of all global central bank reserves are stored in it. When Brazil buys oil from Kuwait, they pay in dollars. When Germany sells cars to China, part of that deal runs through dollars. When any country in the world wants to do business with any other country in the world, the dollar is sitting in the middle of that conversation. That is not an accident. That is the result of one of the greatest geopolitical moves in modern history. And the most fascinating part, most people have never stopped to understand how it happened. How one country used a simple green piece of paper to build the largest financial empire the world has ever seen. And why, even today, with China and Russia throwing everything they have at trying to destroy this system, the dollar is still standing. This is the US Dominance Archive, and today, you're going to understand the real power behind the money that moves the world. To understand the dollar's power today, you need to understand a single moment in history. July 1944. The world is on fire. World War II isn't over yet, but the Allies already know they're going to win. And before the last battle is even fought, 730 delegates from 44 countries arrive at a small mountain resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. They didn't come to celebrate. They came to decide how the world would work after the war. Europe was destroyed. Britain, which for centuries had been the dominant financial power on the planet, with the British pound as the global reserve currency, was broke, indebted to the United States, which had financed their survival. The British gold was gone, the empire was collapsing, and the Americans knew exactly what that meant. There was an empty seat at the top of the global financial system, and they came to Bretton Woods with one plan: to sit in it. The British economist John Maynard Keynes arrived with a radical proposal: create a brand new supranational currency that no single country would control. He called it the Bancor. The idea was that the global financial system would belong to the entire world, not to one nation. The Americans listened and rejected it completely. The American negotiator, Harry Dexter White, had a different plan. Simpler and far more favorable to the United States. The dollar would become the global reserve currency. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be pegged to gold at $35 per troy ounce. Other countries pushed back, but the reality was brutal. The United States held approximately 70% of all the world's monetary gold. Let that sink in. One country controlled almost all the gold on Earth, and then used that position to redesign the entire global financial system. They had the largest intact economy on the planet, the largest army, the largest banks. Keynes lost. The Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, and the US dollar became the currency of the world. Think about what that actually means in practice. From that moment forward, if any country wanted to participate in the international financial system, to buy, sell, invest, or do business with any other nation, they needed dollars. And to get dollars, they had to either export to the United States or borrow from the United States. In a single agreement, the Americans created a permanent global demand for their own currency. This is what economists call the exorbitant privilege. And Americans are the only people on Earth who have it. But here's where the story gets dangerous, because the Bretton Woods system had one fatal vulnerability, and when it broke everything. If the dollar was backed by gold, the United States needed enough gold to cover every single dollar in circulation around the world. And as the global economy grew, as more countries needed more dollars to do more business, that equation became increasingly impossible. The 1960s were a decade of staggering American spending. the Vietnam War burning billions every single month, the space program, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. The United States was printing dollars far faster than it was accumulating gold. The Europeans noticed first. Charles de Gaulle, President of France, was furious. He understood that the United States was essentially exporting its own inflation to the entire world, printing dollars without real backing and making everyone accept them as if they were gold. In 1965, de Gaulle did something dramatic. He sent a ship loaded with dollars to New York to exchange them for physical gold, in the exact terms the Bretton Woods Agreement had promised. Other countries followed. American gold reserves began disappearing at a terrifying speed, and then everything collapsed. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon went live on American television on a Sunday night and announced something the world never expected to hear. The United States was suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold, the Nixon shock. Overnight, the dollar was no longer backed by anything physical. It was just paper. Green paper with the faces of dead presidents. Most analysts thought this was the end. Without gold behind it, why would anyone trust the dollar? They were wrong, because the Americans already had the next move planned, and that move was so audacious, so strategically brilliant, that it rewired the entire world. Stop right there. You just saw how the dollar conquered the global financial system. But what keeps it in power after the gold is gone? What the Americans did next is so important that almost nobody talks about it in schools or on the news. And it's exactly what you need to understand right now. The world is in crisis. The Arab nations of OPEC impose an oil embargo on the United States as retaliation for American support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The price of oil quadruples overnight. Miles-long lines at American gas stations. Economic panic everywhere. For most observers, this was the worst possible moment for the Americans to be negotiating with Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger saw it differently. Kissinger flew to Riyadh with a proposal the Saudis could not refuse. Two sides. Simple. The United States would guarantee the security of the Saudi royal family's regime, sell them weapons, provide military protection. In an unstable and dangerous Middle East, that was worth more than gold. In exchange, the Saudis would do one single thing: sell oil exclusively in US dollars and use the billions they accumulated to buy American Treasury bonds, essentially financing the United States government's debt. The deal was sealed in 1974. Within a few years, every other OPEC country followed. And just like that, the petrodollar was born. Think about what this did to the global system. Oil is the most important commodity in the world. Every industrial nation needs it to function. Factories, transportation, energy, everything runs on oil. And from that moment forward, if you wanted to buy oil, no matter where you were, no matter who you were, you first needed dollars. Brazil needed dollars. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. China needed dollars. India needed dollars. Everyone needed dollars. Nixon had removed the gold backing. Kissinger had created a new one. Not in gold, in oil. In the one commodity every nation on earth needed to survive. The dollar had just made the biggest power leap in modern monetary history. But the petrodollar was only the beginning, and this is where it gets dangerous. Because the dollar isn't just a currency, it's a system. Over the following decades, the Americans built around that system an infrastructure of control so deep, so technically complex, so globally embedded, that today it is almost impossible to participate in the world economy without passing through it. The heart of that infrastructure has a name most people have never heard: SWIFT. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Here's what SWIFT actually does. When a Brazilian company wires money to a supplier in Germany, that message runs through SWIFT. When a Japanese bank pays a South Korean manufacturer, SWIFT. When a Russian oligarch moves money between accounts in different countries, SWIFT. More than 11,000 financial institutions across more than 200 countries. Every single day, it is the backbone of the global financial system, and the Americans have disproportionate influence over it. But SWIFT is just one layer. US Treasury bonds are considered the safest asset in the world. When countries, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds want to store wealth safely, They buy American treasuries. Today, more than $7 trillion in treasury bonds are held by foreigners. Japan alone holds over $1 trillion. China holds close to $1 trillion. These countries are financing the American government's spending, and by doing so, creating a constant structural demand for the dollar. The major American banks, JP Morgan, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, dominate global corporate finance. The world's largest deals run through them. Global commodities, oil, gold, copper, wheat, soybeans, all quoted in dollars. The dollar is not just a currency. It is the operating system of the global economy. And like any operating system, once the entire world builds on top of it, switching becomes almost unthinkable. Now here's something that will completely change how you see American foreign policy. When you understand the dollar system, you understand that America doesn't always need bombs to win a war. Sometimes all it needs is access. The most powerful weapon in American financial history is not a missile system or a nuclear warhead. It's the ability to disconnect a country from the dollar system entirely. We call them sanctions. But what sanctions actually mean in the modern world is something far more devastating than most people realize. When the United States imposes financial sanctions on a country, it is not simply saying we won't trade with you. It is saying you are disconnected from the global financial infrastructure that we built and that we control. Your banks cannot use SWIFT. Your currency cannot be exchanged in international markets. No multinational corporation can do business with you without risking losing access to the American financial system. Your central bank's dollar reserves can be frozen. This is not theoretical. Iran. Sweeping sanctions cut Iran off from the global banking system. The Iranian rial collapsed. Inflation spiraled. The economy contracted by double digits in a single year. No American soldiers, no missiles. Just access, revoked. North Korea. Decades of sanctions have kept the economy in permanent near collapse. The regime can barely access hard currency for anything beyond weapons programs. Russia. After the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the United States and its allies did something considered almost unthinkable just years before. They froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, money that Russia had stored in Western financial institutions as a safety net. Gone overnight. The ruble crashed. Russian banks were cut off from SWIFT, and the message to every other country in the world was unmistakable. If you cross the United States, your money is not safe, even money that is technically yours, sitting in your own central bank. Wait, because what just happened with Russia raises a question that nobody in power wants to answer out loud. If the Americans can freeze any country's dollar reserves at any time, why would any country trust the dollar system at all? Why would China, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, or India keep storing their wealth in a currency controlled by a government that could weaponize it against them? That is exactly the question dozens of countries started asking after 2022, and the answers they've been coming up with are the most important geopolitical story of our time. Let's talk about the challenge. The dollar empire is not without enemies, and those enemies have never been more motivated or more capable. China. For 2 decades, Beijing has been executing a methodical, patient, and extraordinarily ambitious strategy to reduce the world's dependence on the dollar. The first piece, the yuan. China has been aggressively pushing for international trade to be settled in yuan rather than dollars. Bilateral currency swap agreements with dozens of countries, allowing those countries to trade directly with China without converting to dollars first. The yuan is now included in the IMF's special drawing rights basket. Official international legitimacy. China's CIPs, the cross-border interbank payment system, is Beijing's direct answer to SWIFT. It processes international transactions in yuan outside dollar infrastructure, still far smaller than SWIFT, but growing. And every country that joins it is one more country with an alternative to the pipes the Americans control. Then there's the Belt and Road Initiative, China's massive global infrastructure investment program spanning more than 140 countries. Roads, ports, railways, power plants, all financed by Chinese loans, many denominated in yuan. Beijing is literally building the physical infrastructure of trade and attaching its own financial infrastructure on top of it. Russia. After being cut off from SWIFT in 2022, Russia didn't collapse the way Western analysts predicted. It hurt. Badly. But Russia accelerated its de-dollarization with the desperation of a country that had no other choice. Today, the majority of Russia's trade with China is conducted in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. Russian central bank reserves have shifted away from dollar assets and toward gold and non-Western currencies. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with new members including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, and Ethiopia, openly discussing a new BRICS currency to challenge dollar dominance. At the 2023 summit, the conversation was louder and more serious than ever before. And then, the moment that shook Washington. Saudi Arabia, America's original petrodollar partner, began accepting payment for oil in Chinese yuan, small amounts so far, but the symbolism is seismic. The deal Kissinger built in 1974, the foundation of the entire petrodollar system, is showing its first real cracks. The message from the non-Western world is becoming clearer every year. We built our entire economies on your currency. We stored our wealth in your system, and you showed us you can take it away whenever you decide we've misbehaved. That's not a financial system anymore. That's a leash. And yet, despite all of it, despite China's ambitions, Russia's desperation, BRICS declarations, yuan swap agreements, CIPS, Belt and Road, and every challenge thrown at the dollar over the past decade, the dollar is still dominant, by a wide margin. Why? The first reason is network effects. The dollar is dominant because the dollar is dominant. Circular, but precisely the point. The more countries and institutions use the dollar, the more valuable it becomes to use the dollar. If you're a company in Vietnam doing business with a company in Nigeria, you're pricing that deal in dollars. Not because America told you to, but because both companies have dollar accounts, their banks settle in dollars, and the dollar exchange rate is the most liquid reference point in the world. Switching creates friction, cost, and uncertainty. To displace the dollar, you don't just need a better currency. You need every bank, every company, every government, and every central bank to simultaneously agree to switch their entire financial infrastructure to something new. That coordination problem is almost unsolvable. Second reason, the depth of American financial markets. The U.S. Treasury market is the deepest, most liquid financial market in human history. On any given day, trillions of dollars in Treasury bonds change hands. Any country in the world can buy or sell American government debt quickly, at a fair price, in almost unlimited quantities. No other market comes close. The Chinese bond market is large, but not fully open to foreign investors. Capital controls limit how freely money flows in and out. Any country holding massive reserves in yuan faces the risk that if they need to liquidate quickly, they can't. The dollar market is singular, unified, and backed by the full faith and credit of the most powerful government in the world. Third reason, the rule of law. The United States provided something no other potential reserve currency issuer has credibly promised: legal protection for foreign assets held within the American system. Foreign investors have access to American courts. Contracts are enforced. Property rights are respected. Can you say the same about China? A foreign central bank holding $1 trillion in Chinese assets is subject to Chinese law, Chinese courts, and ultimately the decisions of the Chinese Communist Party, which has demonstrated repeatedly it will override legal frameworks when political interests demand it. The dollar's rule of law advantage took decades of consistent behavior to build. China would need decades of equally consistent behavior to earn similar trust. And right now, Beijing is moving in the opposite direction. Here's what this means for you. Not for governments, not for central banks, for you. Every time you buy something manufactured abroad, the dollar is part of why that product exists at your price point. The dollar's reserve status allows the United States to run enormous trade deficits, to import far more than it exports, because the rest of the world needs dollars and will keep accepting them. Your grocery bills, your electronics, your clothes, your car. The dollar system is quietly subsidizing all of it. But there's another side to that coin. The same dollar dominance that makes your imports cheap also hollows out American manufacturing. When everyone needs dollars, demand for the currency stays permanently high. A permanently high dollar makes American exports expensive, which makes American factories uncompetitive globally. The Rust Belt, the collapse of manufacturing across the American Midwest, is not entirely separable from the dollar's reserve status. The exorbitant privilege has an exorbitant cost. It's just a cost paid by factory workers in Ohio, not by Wall Street bankers in Manhattan. The populist anger, the trade wars, the anti-globalization movements, the politicians who promise to bring manufacturing home. All of it flows from one source. The dollar is great for American finance and terrible for American industry. For decades, finance won. Now let's go somewhere almost nobody is talking about. The future of the dollar system is not going to be decided by economists at the Fed. It's going to be decided by technology, specifically digital currencies. The dollar's dominance has always depended on controlling the infrastructure through which money flows. SWIFT, correspondent banking, treasury markets, these are the pipes of the global financial system. The Americans built them. The Americans run them. But what happens when money no longer needs pipes? The rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, represents the most fundamental technological challenge to dollar infrastructure since Bretton Woods. And China is way ahead. The digital yuan, the ECNY, is already in circulation. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens use it. And unlike physical yuan or traditional bank transfers, the digital yuan can be programmed, designed to settle international transactions directly between two central banks, bypassing SWIFT entirely. No American bank in the middle, no American regulatory jurisdiction, no exposure to American sanctions. China is actively pushing the digital yuan across Belt and Road countries, piloting cross-border transactions in the Middle East. The infrastructure they're building is specifically designed to create a dollar-free payment corridor between Beijing and its trading partners. The United States has been notably slow to respond. The Federal Reserve has been studying a potential digital dollar for years. Political opposition from conservatives who fear government surveillance, structural resistance from the powerful American banking lobby that profits from the existing system. A digital dollar remains theoretical. If China deploys a fully functional international digital yuan infrastructure before America deploys a digital dollar, it would be the first real parallel financial system capable of genuinely challenging dollar dominance at scale. That's not science fiction. That race is happening right now. Let's talk about oil one more time. Because the petrodollar, the agreement that has underpinned dollar dominance for 50 years, is under pressure from a direction almost nobody anticipated a decade ago. The energy transition. If the world is moving toward renewable energy, solar, wind, electric vehicles, then global demand for oil is eventually going to decline. And when oil matters less, the petrodollar matters less. Kissinger's 1974 agreement was brilliant, precisely because it tied dollar demand to an inescapable human need: energy. If you needed to run your economy, you needed oil. If you needed oil, you needed dollars. But if you can run your economy on solar power and electricity storage, you don't need oil. And if you don't need oil, you don't need dollars to buy oil. The electric vehicle revolution, the solar energy boom, the declining cost of battery storage. These are not just environmental stories. They are geopolitical stories. Every solar panel installed in India, every electric bus in China, every wind farm in Europe. One small step toward a world where the petrodollar's grip loosens. This will take decades, but the direction is set, and Washington knows it. The Americans built the dollar empire on oil. They are now fighting to build the next empire on clean energy. Whoever controls the energy of the future controls the financial infrastructure of the future. Here's the scenario that keeps U.S. Treasury officials awake at night. It doesn't involve a single dramatic collapse of the dollar. No moment where the dollar crashes overnight and is replaced by something else. History doesn't usually work like that. What keeps them up at night is gradual erosion. Slow, steady, irreversible, country by country, deal by deal. Currency swap by currency swap. Not a revolution, an evolution. The share of global reserves held in dollars has already declined from about 70% in the early 2000s to around 58% today, a 12 percentage point drop in 2 decades. In the context of the global reserve currency system, where change happens glacially, that is a significant shift. If that trend continues, if dollar reserves fall to 50%, then 45%, then 40%, the United States gradually loses the ability to run the deficits it has relied on, the ability to borrow cheaply, the ability to impose sanctions that actually hurt. The exorbitant privilege gets less exorbitant. Higher interest rates, more expensive imports, reduced military capacity, diminished geopolitical leverage. The dollar empire doesn't need to end with a bang. It can end with a long, slow, barely perceptible exhale. But here's the thing. We have been here before. The dollar has been declared dead many times. In the 1970s, after Nixon ended gold convertibility and OPEC showed that oil producers could hold the world hostage, analysts declared the dollar finished. In the 1980s, Japan was going to take over. The yen was going to displace the dollar. In the early 2000s, the euro was going to challenge dollar supremacy. Japan stagnated for 3 decades. The eurozone nearly broke apart in the sovereign debt crisis. The dollar absorbed every challenge and came out stronger. Because here is the fundamental reality that dollar skeptics consistently underestimate. Displacing the dollar requires not just an alternative currency, it requires an alternative system, an alternative legal framework, an alternative set of financial institutions, an alternative web of relationships, treaties, habits, and infrastructure built over 80 years. China's economy is large, but China's financial markets are not open. China's currency is not freely convertible. China's legal system is not independent. And Beijing has shown a willingness to override contracts and property rights when politically convenient. Trust. That is the ultimate backing of any reserve currency. Not gold, not oil. Trust. And trust of the magnitude required to run the global reserve currency is not built in years. It is built over generations, through crisis after crisis, through wars, recessions, financial panics, and coming out the other side with institutions intact and credibility preserved. The United States has that trust, however imperfectly. No other country does. Not yet. Not even close. So where does that leave us? The dollar empire is not invincible. No empire in history has been. The Roman denarius dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries before it was debased into worthlessness. The British pound ran the world financial system for 100 years before Bretton Woods dismantled it. Every reserve currency in history has eventually been replaced. The question is not whether the dollar will eventually be displaced. The question is when, and by what, and what the world looks like in the transition. The honest answer, the one the data supports, is this. Dollar dominance will be challenged, eroded, and gradually diminished over the coming decades. But a complete replacement is not imminent, not in 5 years, probably not in 20. What is happening right now is the slow construction of a parallel system, a world where the dollar coexists with other currencies in a more multipolar financial order, where China, India, and the Gulf states conduct more of their trade outside the dollar system, where the United States retains dollar supremacy, but exercises it over a smaller share of global commerce. That transition is already underway, and it will have consequences for every country on Earth. For the United States, higher borrowing costs, reduced ability to sanction, greater pressure to maintain the credibility that underpins dollar trust. For emerging markets, the possibility of escaping the dollar trap, of borrowing in their own currencies, of not being devastated every time the Fed raises interest rates and capital floods back to America. For China, the long game continues. Patient, methodical, building the infrastructure of an alternative system, one bilateral agreement at a time. For the rest of the world, the transition period will be the most dangerous, because periods of reserve currency transition are historically associated with geopolitical instability. Trade wars, currency wars, sometimes real wars. We are living in the early stages of that transition. You are watching history happen. Here's what most people miss. The dollar system is not just a financial arrangement, it is a reflection of something deeper. For 80 years, the United States has been, whatever its flaws, whatever its failures, the indispensable nation of the global order, the country that built the institutions, the country that provided security, the country that, for all its self-interest, created a framework that allowed global trade to expand, living standards to rise, and war between great powers to stay absent for the longest stretch in modern history. The dollar is trusted because the United States has been a somewhat predictable actor in global affairs. That predictability is now being questioned, not by China or Russia, from within. The polarization of American politics, the questioning of democratic norms, the flirtation with debt default, the weaponization of dollar sanctions in ways that have made even American allies nervous. Every time Washington acts in ways that undermine the rule of law or signals that America's commitments are conditional, it chips away at the one thing that cannot be manufactured artificially: trust. The greatest threat to the dollar empire is not China's digital yuan. It is not Russian rubles or BRICS declarations. It is not even the energy transition. The greatest threat to the dollar empire is the possibility that America stops being the kind of country whose currency the rest of the world wants to hold. That is a choice, not a fate. This is the U.S. Dominance Archive. We don't do surface-level analysis here. We go all the way down, into the structures, the decisions, the moments in history that shaped the world you live in without most people ever noticing. Today you understood how a green piece of paper conquered the world, how a deal in the mountains of New Hampshire in 1944 changed everything, how a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia in 1974 replaced gold with oil and made the dollar untouchable, how SWIFT, treasury markets and American financial infrastructure became the operating system of global commerce, and why, even as China builds, Russia fights, and the world slowly diversifies, the dollar is still standing. The dollar empire was never just about money. It was about trust, predictability, the belief that the rules would hold. That belief is America's greatest asset, and the only power on earth that can truly destroy it is America itself. Subscribe to U.S. Dominance Archive and drop a comment below. If the U.S. can freeze any country's money at any time, why would anyone still trust it? I read every single one. See you next time.